We've all heard the warnings, always check your back seat before driving off. But what if you did, and still missed something? What if something was already there, watching, waiting? Tonight, we bring you 3 terrifying true stories of night shift horrors, where ordinary deliveries turned into nightmares. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at an empty back seat the same way again. Story 1. The Vanishing House. Mike had been delivering pizzas for nearly 3 years. He had encountered his fair share of weird customers, late-night prank calls, drunk people answering in their underwear, and even an old man who tried to pay with a pocket full of pennies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for this one night. It was a slow evening, and just when he thought he'd get to clock out early, an order came in. A large pepperoni pizza, cash payment. The address? A remote house at the edge of town, in a neighborhood he had never delivered to before. As Mike drove down the winding road, the GPS signal flickered on his phone. The closer he got, the more his surroundings changed. The houses became darker, more abandoned-looking, as if no one had lived there in decades. Streetlights were either broken or missing entirely. His car's headlights barely cut through the thick fog rolling across the cracked pavement. Finally, he reached the address. Decrepit old house standing alone at the end of the street. The windows were pitch black, the front yard overgrown with weeds. Yet, despite the house's abandoned appearance, the porch light was dimly glowing. Mike hesitated before grabbing the pizza and stepping out. As he made his way up the steps, the wood creaked beneath his feet. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. Just as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A shadow moved behind the front window. The silhouette of a tall, thin figure stood completely still, just barely visible behind the curtain. Then a whisper, "Come in." Mike's blood ran cold. His grip on the pizza box tightened. Sir, I have your order," he called out, stepping back. Silence. Then the sound of something shifting inside. A chair scraping against the wooden floor. A faint, raspy breath just beyond the door. Mike didn't wait around. He set the pizza on the doorstep and quickly turned back toward his car. His heart was pounding as he climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors. That's when his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Thanks for the delivery. See you soon." Mike's stomach twisted. He slowly turned his gaze back toward the house. The front door was now slightly open, swinging ever so gently as if inviting him back inside. The porch light flickered once, and went out. He didn't stay to find out more. He peeled out of there so fast his tires screeched. The next morning, he looked up the address out of curiosity. The house had burned down 30 years ago. There were no survivors. Story 2. The Man in the Back Seat. Josh was exhausted. It had been an insanely busy Friday night, and he was running on nothing but a Red Bull and 3 hours of sleep. His feet ached, his head throbbed, and all he could think about was going home, collapsing onto his bed, and passing out until noon the next day. He had one last delivery before calling it a night. The address was just a few blocks away, a small, quiet house at the end of an empty cul-de-sac. The order was simple: 1 large cheese pizza, cash payment. The drive was uneventful. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the kind of place where most people were already asleep by 10. The only sound was the hum of streetlights flickering overhead. Josh pulled into the driveway, grabbed the pizza, and walked up to the door. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Sighing, he checked his phone. No texts, no missed calls. Then, just as he was about to leave, the door creaked open, but only slightly. Josh leaned forward, trying to get a look inside. Hello?" he called out. Silence. A strange, damp smell drifted from within the house. It was like mildew mixed with something metallic. It made his stomach turn. Something about the situation felt wrong. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but he needed to get paid. Just as he was about to turn away, a frail hand shot out from the darkness, slipping a few crumpled bills into his palm. "Keep the change," a voice whispered. Josh barely had time to process what had just happened before the door slammed shut. His pulse quickened. Something about the way the person moved, the way their hand felt like ice, unnerved him, but he tried to shake it off as exhaustion messing with his head. With a sigh, he turned and made his way back to his car. He tossed the money onto the passenger seat and started the engine. That's when he felt it. A chill ran down his spine. It was subtle at first, a strange, prickling sensation, like the air inside the car had shifted, as if someone else was there. Slowly, he reached for his rearview mirror, and his blood ran cold. For a split second, he saw something. A figure, sitting in his back seat. The outline of a tall man, unmoving, his head tilted slightly. Josh's breath hitched. His body went rigid. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. Then, blink. He looked again. Nothing. Back seat was empty. Josh exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel. His fingers were ice cold. "Lack of sleep," he muttered, forcing a laugh. "That's all it is." He put the car in drive and pulled away from the house, shaking his head. But something still felt off. The air in the car hadn't warmed up. The hairs on the back of his neck were still standing. And then, his phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. His stomach twisted as he hesitantly glanced at the screen. "You should have checked again." His breath caught in his throat. His hands went numb. A deep, sinking terror coiled in his gut as he slowly turned his gaze back toward the mirror. The back seat was no longer empty. A pale face stared back at him just inches away, grinning. The last thing he heard before everything went black was a sharp, wheezing laugh. When Josh woke up, he was still in his car, but not in the same place. His vehicle was now parked miles away, deep in an abandoned parking lot, surrounded by trees. His driver's side door was open, letting in the freezing night air. His phone was gone, and on the passenger seat, where the crumpled bills had been, there was now a single bloody handprint. Josh never worked the night shift again. Story 3: The Basement Trap. Sarah had been delivering pizzas for 6 months. Most of her customers were nice, some were rude, but nothing ever felt dangerous. Until that night, her last order of the shift came in close to midnight. The address was in an unfamiliar area, near the outskirts of town, where houses were old and spaced too far apart. As she pulled up, she immediately felt uneasy. The house was Victorian style, its wooden exterior rotting, shutters creaking in the wind. Yet, despite its abandoned look, a warm yellow glow flickered from inside. Sarah hesitated but eventually knocked. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with a kind smile. "Oh, thank you, dear," the woman said softly. "Would you mind bringing it inside? My legs aren't what they used to be." Something felt off. The woman didn't blink. Her smile was too wide, her gaze too intense. Sarah hesitated but took a step inside, just far enough to place the pizza on a small wooden table. That's when she heard it. A bang from the basement. Sarah froze. The old woman's smile vanished. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she whispered. "She never left either." Sarah's heart slammed against her chest. Then, the basement door swung open. Pale hands reached out from the darkness. Sarah screamed, knocking over the table, sprinting for the door as the old woman laughed behind her. She barely made it to her car, speeding away as fast as she could. The next morning, Sarah searched the address online. The house had burned down 10 years ago. No one had lived there since. If you ever deliver pizza to an unfamiliar place at night, trust your instincts. Because sometimes, the house might not exist. The back seat might not be empty. And the person at the door might not be human. Would you work the night shift after hearing these stories? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more terrifying real-life horror stories. As pizza.